We often hear about the CHamoru people suffering under the brutal Japanese occupation during the war, how they were forced into concentration camps in Menengan, and how the Americans liberated them. But the story usually stops there, jumping straight to the 1950s with the signing of the Organic Act. So what happened to the CHamorus immediately after the war for Guam? Guahan, and in this video, I'll share the untold CHamoru struggles of 1944 through 1946. Around 700 CHamorus on Guam lost their lives as a result of the war, and the capital city of Agana, which housed approximately 10,000 residents, nearly half of Guam's pre-war population of 23,000, was left in complete ruin. Every village from Jigo to Sumai and Agate was destroyed, with only the three southern villages of Umatic, Maritso, and Inarajan remaining intact. The U.S. military deliberately ordered the destruction of villages to root out the Japanese soldiers and allow American troops to advance with fewer obstacles. What wasn't destroyed by combat was demolished by Navy Seabees using bulldozers and earth movers to clear land for the over 200,000 Army, Navy, and Marine Corps troops stationed on Guam between 1944 and 1945. After the assault phase of the invasion on July 21, 1944, civil affairs units came ashore. The main civil affairs unit, comprising about a dozen officers and men, established operations in Agate, marking off a barren field with a single strand of discarded telephone wire to create the first refugee camp, located just across the invasion beach at Guahan. This site would later become Agate Village as we know it today. The camp, though safe, was stark and barren, without a single tree standing. With the return of the Americans, thousands of CHamorus left Japanese concentration camps, carrying what few belongings they had, and found themselves in new refugee camps hastily set up in Agate and Anigua. Ironically, the Japanese concentration camps may have saved hundreds, if not thousands of CHamoru lives. The camps located away from the fighting effectively quarantined the CHamorus from the deadly air raids, intense naval bombardments, and the crossfire between American forces and Japanese defenders during the battle for Guam. Within a week of the invasion, the Agate camp housed 800 refugees, and 10 days after the invasion, the population had grown to over 1,300. By the first week of August, approximately 12,000 refugees were being cared for in Agate, and a second camp set up in Agana's Bradley Field in Anigua. The influx of refugees was so great that many overflowed into Pico Cemetery. Refugees came from concentration camps in Menengan and other hiding places, many traveling on foot from Jotnia. While a few were fortunate enough to travel on the backs of horses, bulls, or cows, most walked part of the way before being transported to the camps in military trucks, jeeps, weapon carriers, or amphibious vehicles. Due to the overcrowded conditions of the two refugee camps at Agate and Anigua, additional refugee camps were set up at Menengan, as well as Mata, Talafofo, and Dedido. The CHamoru people faced dire conditions during this time. Many were severely malnourished, afflicted with diseases such as yaws and tropical ulcers, and physically drained from the immense hardships they endured. Upon arriving at the refugee camps, they were given canned foods like spam and corned beef hash, as well as salvaged rations from Japanese stockpiles. Although supplying the camps with food was challenging, no CHamoru starved. Initially, there was a severe lack of shelter at the camps. In Agate camp, the military provided only ponchos and tents, which became unbearably hot under the scorching sun. Rain often soaked through the tents, leaving the occupants wet and turning the camp into a sea of mud. Makeshift latrines, showers, and communal kitchens were constructed to improve conditions. At the Anigua refugee camp, the situation was somewhat better, as CHamorus were able to build community houses, using salvaged materials from the ruins of Agana. In another camp, they crafted shelters from indigenous materials like woven coconut palm leaves. For months after liberation, many CHamoru men and boys had only military-donated fatigues, khakis, and GI t-shirts to wear. Women made do with what clothing and shoes they could get from the American Red Cross, and eventually civilian clothing was provided for everyone. Despite the widespread suffering, the CHamoru people remained resilient, even in the harsh conditions of the camps. They sang "Uncle Sam, Please Come Back to Guam," a song composed during the Japanese occupation, expressing their gratitude for liberation. Spiritual life persisted. Mass was held. Babies were baptized, and makeshift altars were built. The CHamoru's did not complain, grateful to be free from Japanese oppression and to receive much-needed food and aid. During the recapture of Guam and its transformation into a strategic forward base for the United States, the majority of the island's traditional settlements and landmarks were destroyed, leading to a drastic shift in the island lifestyle that had long defined island life. American military officials informed CHamoru leaders that the deliberate destruction of Agania and other villages along the invasion route was necessary to prevent Japanese forces from using buildings as cover, avoiding the kind of urban combat seen in Saipan. Though heartbreaking, this explanation was accepted without protest, as the CHamoru's were deeply grateful for their liberation despite the significant losses they endured. Once an area was declared safe, CHamoru's in the refugee camps were encouraged to return to their homes. However, returning residents in Agania, Agate, Piti, Asin, and other villages were devastated by the total destruction of their communities. Homes, schools, churches, and familiar landmarks had been replaced by bomb craters and debris. Many CHamoru's broke down in tears as they sifted through the ruins, finding little to salvage. While some, particularly in the relatively untouched villages of Umatic, Maritso, and Inarahan, had homes to return to, most CHamoru's did not, resulting in thousands of CHamoru's being displaced. The widespread destruction not only erased the physical structures of CHamoru life, but also disrupted the social and cultural fabric that had sustained the island for generations. Furthermore, the military took over large tracts of land. Sumai, once the second largest village on the island, was permanently taken by the military for naval use, forcing its 2,000 residents to relocate to what is now Santa Rita. The displacement, coupled with the military's takeover of large tracts of land from Agate to Jigo for depots and storage, left many CHamoru's without access to their traditional farmlands, altering the island's way of life for years to come. Homeless and deprived of their land, CHamoru's waited in refugee camps while new villages were constructed in Agate, Santa Rita, Sinahania, Jotnia, Talafofo, Barrigada, and Dededo. Some, however, didn't wait for a formal resettlement. By late August 1944, Simon A. Sanchez led a small group of families from the Anigua refugee camp to resettle on Lujan land in Tamunin, near Halagua Cliff. Major villages like Santa Rita, Dededo, Sinahania, Jotnia, Talafofo, Jigo, Asin, Agania Heights, and Barrigada were either founded or significantly expanded during this post-war period by the military government in 1944 through 1945. Most of these villages, except Agate, had fewer than 150 families before the war. By October 1944, the island started to show signs of recovery. Schools reopened, and the civilian economy began to slowly revive. Jobs and civil affairs programs expanded as new initiatives were launched, and the military created hundreds of additional positions across Guam, offering employment to many CHamoru's. For the first time, men and women who had never worked for wages found paid jobs. The traditional subsistence economy, which relied on agriculture and fishing, and had endured through the Japanese occupation, began to shift towards a wage-based system centered on service occupations. To reduce the strain on civil affairs, rationing, and distribution efforts, authorities reached out to pre-war business owners, offering them locations and supplies to operate grocery stores in the camps and communities. These stores, which opened in October of 1944, were stocked with goods from military sources and served the CHamoru's, many of whom were experiencing their first taste of wage-earning life. By 1945, there was a sense of normalcy on Guam. After the end of World War II, Guam's vast military complex faced the daunting task of demobilization. War activities halted abruptly, and by the end of 1945, the number of military personnel in Guam had decreased from over 250,000 to less than 50,000. In their wake, the departing military left behind vast areas of barren land, stripped of topsoil and trees, making it unusable for agriculture. Abandoned buildings, equipment, and debris cluttered the island. Despite this, many CHamoru's found employment in the new wage-earning jobs, which provided some relief amidst the ongoing devastation. By mid-1945, roughly 5,000 CHamoru's remained homeless, stuck in the refugee camps, largely because the Navy forbade resettlement in parts of Agania and the entire village of Sumai. Soon, the entire village of Agania was allowed to be resettled, and Santa Rita was built. And eventually, the temporary military government of Guam determined that the urgent military need to continue operations on the island had passed. As a result, on May 30th, 1946, the temporary military government ceased operations, and the naval government of Guam was reinstated. It wasn't until June of 1946, nearly 2 years after liberation, that the last of the makeshift refugee camps were emptied. Yet an estimated 10,000 people still lived in temporary government-provided housing. At the time the naval government was reestablished in 1946, the population of Guam numbered 23,136. It comprised of 22,628 CHamoru's and 508 other residents. The aftermath of World War II caused a significant dispersal of the CHamoru population. In 1940 through 1941, about 60% of some 23,000 islanders had been concentrated in Agania and the eastern shore villages from Anigua to Sumai and Agate. With the destruction of these villages, by 1946, the population has shifted to new communities like Sinahanya, which became Guam's largest village with 7,547 people, compared to its 1940 population of 1,236. Barrigada's population also grew significantly, from 875 in 1940 to 3,231 in 1946. Most of Agania's 10,000 pre-war residents were resettled in these two villages, with only 760 residents returning to Agania. As we've seen, the end of World War II marked not only liberation for the CHamoru people, but also the beginning of an entirely new struggle. The destruction of homes, villages, and farmlands, combined with the displacement into refugee camps, left the CHamoru's facing the monumental task of rebuilding their lives in the wake of war. While much of the story of Guam during World War II focuses on occupation and liberation, it's important to remember the resilience and strength shown in the years that followed. Years filled with hardship, resettlement, and the ongoing fight for a sense of normalcy. The challenges CHamoru's endured in 1944 through 1946 are often overlooked, yet they are a critical part of our history. From the barren refugee camps to the rebuilding of new villages, CHamoru's rose from the ashes of war with unwavering determination. Today, as we reflect on this period, we honor not only their suffering, but their resilience. If you liked and enjoyed the video, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can continue to produce more Pacific Studies content. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on all notifications, follow me on social media at PulanSpeaks. And a special Seduce Mossy to Patreon supporters Puti'on, Dylan Sablan, Jesse Babauta, Athena-nike, and Reyna, Taitingfong, Aguero, Carter. Seduce Mossy for watching. Guahu si Pulan, and Pulan has spoken. Esta.